What would you do if a retired police dog led you deep into the woods only to uncover a hidden world of missing children and a message left just for you? The call came in at 6:13 p.m. 2 boys, ages 7 and 9, had gone missing from a campsite just outside Branson, Missouri. No cell signal, no footprints, no sign of a struggle. Just silence. By 7 p.m., the sun had dropped behind the treetops, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and gold. Flashlights flickered through the brush as volunteers shouted names that only echoed back at them. Still nothing. The father, Mark Carter, was trembling when Deputy Sarah Bennett arrived. His flannel shirt was torn, arms covered in scratches from desperate searching. His voice cracked, hollow from screaming. They were just right there, he kept saying, pointing to the tree line. Ethan was roasting marshmallows. Daniel had his inhaler clipped to his belt. Then I turned around and... He choked on the words. Sarah crouched next to the fire pit. It was still warm. A pack of marshmallows lay spilled in the dirt, and 2 tiny jackets hung from the cooler like Ghost Lim's own forest green, the other navy blue. She didn't need to ask how long they'd been gone. Too long. The youngest, Daniel, had asthma. The oldest, Ethan, was terrified of the dark. Both boys had no business being out in the woods alone after dusk, not in this part of the country. Not with the cold creeping in. Sarah reached for her radio. "This is Deputy Bennett. Bring in Shadow." A pause crackled through the line. "You sure?" "He's retired. I'm sure." Shadow was no ordinary dog. He'd once been the crown jewel of the K9 unit, sharp, loyal, unshakable. A purebred German shepherd with a nose that could find a needle in a haystack. But after an injury to his right paw during a rescue gone wrong, he'd been honorably retired. Still, when Sarah opened the back of her dusty Tahoe, Shadow was already pacing inside, nose twitching, ears alert, muscles taut. He knew. Sarah clipped on his lead, leaned in and whispered, "Let's find them, boy." And they moved. The forest at night wasn't just dark, it was alive. Branches creaked like old bones, leaves rustled under invisible feet, and with every step, the quiet grew heavier. Shadow didn't hesitate. Nose down, tail straight, he pulled Sarah through a maze of trees and underbrush. 15 minutes in, his behavior changed. He paused, circled, sniffed the air, then bolted right. Sarah ran after him, pushing past vines and roots, ignoring the sting of thorns against her skin. Her breath puffed white in the cooling air. Shadow was fast, but not reckless. He paused again near a patch of thick brush, growling low. Sarah caught up and froze. There, half sunken in the earth, covered in vines and thyme, was an old camper. Rust peeled from the sides. One tire was flat. The roof sagged slightly in the center. It looked like it had been forgotten for years. Forgotten or hidden. "Shadow," she called, her voice a whisper. The dog had already reached the door, pawing at it frantically, barking sharp and loud. Sarah rushed forward and yanked the handle. It didn't budge. She tried again, locked. From the outside. Then, a sound, faint. A knock. "Hello?" she shouted. "Ethan?" "Daniel." Another knock. Then a voice, soft, dry, shaking. "Help us." Sarah stepped back. Slammed her shoulder into the door once, twice, until the rusted metal gave way with a groan. Inside, in the dim glow of her flashlight, were 2 boys. Dirty. Pale, alive, they were wrapped in tattered blankets, their eyes wide and glassy. Shadow pushed past Sarah and leapt into the camper, licking their faces as they clung to him like a lifeline. Daniel, the younger one, started crying. Ethan just held on to the dog's fur and whispered, "He told us you'd come." Sarah's heart skipped. "Who did?" The boys looked at each other, afraid. "We didn't see him," Ethan murmured. "Just Boots." He said to wait, said the dog would come. Minutes later, Sarah had called for backup, EMTs, and the forensics team. Mark Carter arrived not long after, dropping to his knees when he saw his boys, sobbing into their hair, holding them like they were made of glass. To everyone on that scene, it was a miracle. But Sarah Bennett didn't believe in miracles, not anymore. She stood outside the camper, eyeing the rusted frame. The old Missouri license plate cracked in half. Something about it gnawed at her. She scribbled the VIN into her notepad, knowing she'd run it as soon as she got back. Shadow sat beside her, ears still perked, eyes fixed on the trees. He wasn't relaxing, because whatever had happened out here wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The boys were safe. That should have been the end of the story. But for Deputy Sarah Bennett, it was just the beginning. She'd seen strange things in her 12 years on the force, but nothing like this, nothing that made her skin crawl quite like that camper. The rust, the silence, the way it had sunken into the ground as if the forest had tried to swallow it whole. It had been hidden too well, almost intentionally. And worse, something about it felt familiar. Wrong, but familiar. Back at the station, long after the boys had been taken to the hospital and the forest had fallen quiet, Sarah sat in front of her terminal. She opened the database and typed in the VIN she had written in her notepad. She hit enter. The result hit her like a punch to the chest. Reported destroyed. Total loss. Fire. March 2018. Sarah blinked. That wasn't possible. The camper was real. She'd opened the door herself. She'd pulled Ethan and Daniel Carter out with her own 2 hands. Shadow had barked at its door. The blankets were real. The air inside had reeked of sweat and damp rot. And yet, according to the records, this camper had burned to the ground near Table Rock Lake 5 years ago. She ran the search again. Same result. Filed under the name Vincent Hale. The name tugged at something deep in Sarah's memory, but it wouldn't surface, not yet. Shadow shifted beside her, letting out a quiet huff as he lay down. Even off duty, he was alert, as if waiting for the next command. Sarah leaned back in her chair. What did we just step into, boy? The next morning, the town was buzzing. Hero dog saves lost boys. Retired K9 finds children after frantic search. Deputy and dog duo hailed as local heroes. The headlines made it sound like a fairy tale, but Sarah knew better. Real stories didn't end with a ribbon and a handshake. They unraveled layer by layer until the truth clawed its way to the surface. And this truth was just beginning to stir. She drove to the county archives that afternoon and requested the original fire report from 2018. It took an hour of digging, but when she found it, her blood ran cold. The photos showed the camper engulfed in flames, a collapsed roof, melted siding, blackened trees surrounding the site. The report concluded, accidental propane explosion. No bodies recovered, no foul play suspected, but one detail stood out. The fire had taken place less than a mile from where Shadow had discovered the camper the night before. That meant either the camper had miraculously survived the fire and crawled its way through the forest, or someone had switched them. Burned one to cover the loss. Hid the other for what? Sarah didn't like either option. The next day, a fresh forensic team combed the forest around the clearing. Cadaver dogs, drones, metal detectors. The camper itself had been towed to the state lab for inspection, but the ground where it had rested still held secrets. Near the edge of the clearing, buried under a thin layer of pine needles, they found a second VIN plate bent, blackened by heat, and it matched the one from the 2018 fire report. There were 2 campers, one destroyed for insurance, one hidden, waiting. And it hadn't been stumbled upon, it had been placed. That was no accident. Shadow barked once sharp, sure, then took off into the brush. Sarah followed. About 300 feet away, he stopped at the base of a tree. There, half buried in dirt and leaves, was a rusted padlock. Nearby, A plastic storage bin lay tucked under a fallen branch. Sarah knelt beside it. Inside was a child's shooteny, white, with a pink flower on the side, a tattered blanket, and a spiral notebook covered in crayon scribbles. Not Ethan's, not Daniel's, she froze. Dear God. Back at the station, Sarah filed a request for missing children cases over the past 10 years within a 100-mile radius. The list was longer than she expected. Runaways, custody battles, cold cases. But one name leapt off the screen. Grace Walker, age 6, vanished 2019 from a highway rest stop. Her shoe, a white sneaker with a pink flower, matched the one in the bin. Sarah's stomach twisted. This wasn't the work of an amateur. Whoever had done this had been operating for years, quietly, carefully, without leaving a single trace until now. That evening, Sarah paid a visit to Mark and Laura Carter, the parents of Ethan and Daniel. Their modest ranch-style home sat at the edge of town. The boys were in the den, playing video games. But Sarah noticed the way Daniel flinched every time the game's background music got too loud. Mark looked 10 years older than when she last saw him. Laura hadn't touched her coffee. Sarah sat at the kitchen table with them. "There's something I need to ask," she said gently. "Did either of you recognize anything about the camper? Had you seen it before?" Mark shook his head. "No." "I mean, maybe when I was a kid. That model looks like the kind my uncle had, but no, nothing specific." Sarah turned to Laura. "What about the man, the one the boys mentioned?" Laura tightened her grip on the mug. "They said he didn't show his face." "Just told them to stay inside. Said help was coming." Sarah nodded. "He wasn't lying." "But he wasn't trying to rescue them either." Mark frowned. "What are you saying?" Sarah hesitated. "I'm saying this wasn't random. Someone staged that camper like a trap. Maybe not for them specifically, but for someone. And now that we've found it, he knows we're getting close." That night, Shadow wouldn't settle. He paced near the back door, growling low under his breath. Sarah grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside. Nothing. Just wind. And crickets. But Shadow was still staring into the trees, and Sarah had the sinking feeling they were being watched. The next morning, Sarah Bennett sat in her office, staring at a still frame from the trail camera. A man stood at the edge of the forest, blurry, unmoving, watching. The image had been captured 30 minutes after Shadow found Ethan and Daniel. The camera, set up by the forensic team just hours earlier, had caught only one frame of the figure before he vanished into the trees. The man wore a hoodie. His hands were tucked in his pockets. No face, no visible features. But one detail made Sarah's skin crawl. The boots, military style, high-laced, tan leather, exactly as Daniel had described. And when she zoomed in, she saw something else, barely there. A faint smudge of red on the sleeve near the wrist. Almost like paint or a patch. No department in the region issued that kind of uniform. Not police, not fire, not even state corrections. Whoever this man was, he didn't belong. And yet he'd been there, watching, waiting, like he already knew what would happen. Sarah returned to the county archives after lunch. She couldn't shake the name from the camper's VIN. Vincent Hale. It gnawed at her. Deep in the dusty records room, she flipped through boxes until she found what she was looking for, the 2018 fire report, once again. This time, she read slower. The original fire occurred in March 2018, less than a mile from where Shadow had found the hidden camper. The cause, likely an unattended propane stove. No bodies were found. No suspects named. The owner, Vincent Hale. But Hale was marked unreachable. No criminal record. No living relatives on file. His last known address was a run-down farmhouse on the outskirts of Tenney County. Sarah scribbled it down, then paused. At the bottom of the file, buried in the notes from the fire marshal, was a single strange detail. Caller reported children's voices coming from the woods near the burn site before the blaze. Dismissed as prank. Halloween weekend. That gave Sarah chills. Children's voices from the woods. Before the fire. It wasn't a prank. It had been a pattern. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. Shadow paced the floor again, ears perked toward the window. Sarah turned on the porch light. The woods beyond her backyard looked still. But it wasn't the quiet kind of still, it was the kind that watched. She made a decision. Tomorrow, she whispered to Shadow, we go see where this started. At 9 a.m. sharp the next morning, Sarah pulled up the gravel driveway of the listed farmhouse address. Shadow sat in the passenger seat, and he was growling, deep, guttural. Sarah hadn't heard that sound from him since his last major case years ago. That was enough. She stepped out, hand resting on her sidearm. The house was falling apart, shingles missing, porch sagging, windows boarded, but the front door? It was slightly ajar. She called out, "Sheriff's Department! If anyone's inside, I need you to show your hands." Silence. Shadow moved low beside her, just like old times, his body tense, head low. Sarah nudged the door open with her boot. The smell hit her first, dust. Rot. Stale air and something else. Something metallic. Inside, the living room was empty but not abandoned. There was a mattress on the floor, stacks of canned food, a kerosene lantern, a pile of clothes, some adult-sized, some clearly for children. And then she saw the wall. Hundreds of drawings were taped across it, made with crayons, pencils, markers. Some were innocent, stick figures, rainbows, dogs. But others. One showed a camper in the woods, with children peeking out the window. Another had a man standing outside, holding a sign. He waits. Another, 2 children under a bed. A dark shape loomed outside. Sarah snapped photos of everything. Then Shadow barked sharp and loud. He was staring at the back wall. Beneath an old rug was a trap door. Sarah knelt, pulled it open. A set of wooden stairs led into Shadow. The basement was small, cramped, cold. But what it lacked in size, it made up for in dread. Lining the walls were shelves, and on those shelves were VHS tapes. Each one labeled by hand. G. Walker, 07-11-19. M. Serrano, 06-22-16. E. Carter, 03-11-23. Sarah's heart froze. That last one, E. Carter, was Ethan. 3 days ago. She grabbed the tape and sprinted back upstairs. No VCR here. But she had one at the station. She had to know. Back at the station, Sarah set up the old VCR and popped in the tape. Static. Then a grainy shot of the inside of the camper. Ethan and Daniel sat on the floor. Confused, quiet, they weren't crying. They weren't hurt, but someone was talking to them from off camera. "We're going to stay very still, okay? Just until your dog finds you. He's a good dog. He'll come." The voice was soft. Male, calm, too calm. Sarah closed her eyes and listened again. No accent, no threat. But something about it felt familiar. Shadow let out a low whine beside her. Sarah looked down. Could it be? She sent the audio clip to the FBI's Forensic Linguistics Unit. It would take time. But she already had a hunch. Vincent Hale wasn't a stranger. He was someone they'd all heard before. The tape had changed everything. Ethan and Daniel weren't found by accident. They were placed like pieces in a puzzle. And the voice on that tape wasn't trying to scare them. It was preparing them. Sarah Bennett sat in silence after watching the VHS again. The way the man spoke, it was clinical, patient, like he knew the boys would be rescued eventually, like he wanted them to be. But why? Shadow rested at her feet, his ears twitching even in the quiet. He hadn't stopped watching the door since they came back from that farmhouse. As if he sensed something Sarah couldn't see. Maybe he was right. She turned back to the screen and froze the final frame. Ethan, Daniel, the camper behind them, but something stood out. In the corner of the screen, barely visible, was a scrap of paper pinned to the wall beside the boys. Sarah zoomed in. It was a crayon drawing, 3 stick figures inside a box. A large black dog stood outside, and beside it, drawn entirely in red, was a 4th figure. Above it, in shaky child handwriting, were the words, "He said to stay quiet."
The dog would come. Sarah swallowed hard. This wasn't just about this case, it was bigger.
Longer. Older. The next day, a new forensic team was deployed to the original camper site. They re-examined the clearing, searching for anything they'd missed. Shadow was with them, nose working the perimeter like he was reading invisible ink. An hour in, one of the techs called out, "Deputy Bennett, you need to see this." Buried beneath a thin layer of dirt and pine needles, about 40 feet from where the camper had been, was a mound of ash. Mixed within it were burned metal fragments, twisted by heat. And wedged between the soot and soil was a second VIN plate. Sarah pried it loose with gloved hands. It matched the VIN from the 2018 fire report, the one listed as destroyed. Her heart sank. There really had been 2 campers. One had been burned on purpose. The other had been hidden, untouched, deep in the forest, which meant someone had switched them, set fire to one for insurance, and saved the other for something far more sinister. Shadow barked short and sharp and took off again through the trees. Sarah chased after him, ducking low branches, boots crunching over brittle leaves. He led her deeper into the woods, down a slope, to a moss-covered log. There, half buried beneath a fallen branch, was another plastic storage bin. Sarah opened it. Inside, a child's pink and yellow shoe, a faded blanket torn at the edges, a spiral notebook with more crayon drawings. These weren't Ethan's. And they weren't Grace Walker's either. The name on one of the pages was written in block letters, Lacey J. Sarah's breath caught. She remembered the name. Lacey Jordan. Disappeared 2016. Age 7. Last seen at a campground in Arkansas. Vanished during a family vacation. Never found. Until now. Back at the station, Sarah pulled the missing persons file for Lacey Jordan. One photo in particular made her stomach turn. Lacey was holding a plush fox stitched by hand with mismatched button eyes. It was identical to the toy recovered from the farmhouse cellar. This wasn't coincidence. It was collection. One child at a time. Always quiet, always careful, and always just far enough away that no one could connect the dots. Until now. Agent Olivia Brooks arrived from the FBI field office later that afternoon. She had flown in after the VHS discovery and brought with her a thick folder of federal-flagged incidents from the past 10 years. She tossed it on Sarah's desk. "We've seen patterns like this before," she said, "but never this clean." "No ransom, no trafficking, no physical harm," she paused. "He's not just taking them, he's studying them, and the rescuers too." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Us?" Olivia nodded. "Your dog's name is Shadow, right?" "Yeah. We cross-checked some of the other recovered drawings. Several have dogs in them. Some even labeled." She opened a file and pulled out a child's sketch of a shepherd. Underneath it, scribbled in orange marker, "The dog always comes." Sarah felt her throat tighten. "He's been leaving these like a trail." "Breadcrumbs," Olivia said, "but not for law enforcement. For you. For Shadow." That night, Sarah returned home late. Shadow sat on the porch like he'd been waiting the entire time. She sank into the steps beside him, resting a hand on his back. He knows who you are, she whispered. He's been watching us. Shadow let out a low growl and turned toward the tree line. Sarah followed his gaze. Something moved, just beyond the fence, a flicker, a shape. She rose slowly and walked to the edge of her yard. Pinned to a low-hanging branch was a folded piece of paper, yellowed with time, attached by a safety pin. She opened it carefully. The handwriting was blocky, unbalanced, familiar. You were always the good one, but this story isn't finished. Not until I say goodbye. VH. Sarah stood there in the dark, the note trembling in her hand. Shadow growled again, deeper this time, and in the dirt beneath the branch, drawn with a stick, were 3 letters, RK9. Shadow sniffed the letters, then looked up at her, eyes steady. Sarah exhaled slowly. Whoever this was, they didn't just know the dog's designation. They knew his name. And they were watching. The following morning, Sarah Bennett stood in front of her caseboard, a wall of faces and red string connecting years of questions. Photos of children. Locations, dates, and now something worse, patterns. 3 children had already been connected by objects found in the forest. Ethan and Daniel Carter, 2023, Grace Walker, 2019, Lacey Jordan, 2016, all missing under different circumstances, all vanished without a sound. And now, all linked by drawings, toys, or items buried near the hidden camper. Sarah took a sip of cold coffee and stared at the name at the center of it all. Vincent Hale, the man who had no arrest record, no employment history after 2014, and no digital footprint for nearly a decade. But now, he was everywhere, watching, whispering, and leaving behind just enough to be followed. Later that day, Agent Olivia Brooks returned with something new. We ran the name through archived foster system files, she said. Turns out, Hale applied to be a certified foster parent 3 times between 2009 and 2011. All 3 were denied, but one application stood out. He requested placement for a specific child, Olivia continued. Her name was Grace Walker. Sarah's blood went cold. You're telling me he knew her before she disappeared? Not officially. But she was in the system. The records show he submitted a hand-drawn storybook with the application complete with voice recordings. Sarah's throat tightened. He was practicing. Olivia nodded. And he kept doing it. He sent books, toys, tapes, things with his voice on them. They flagged him for emotional manipulation, but not criminal behavior. And when they shut him down, Grace vanished 3 years later. Back in her office, Sarah spread out the drawings recovered from the forest bins and the camper. One done in pencil, not crayons, stood out. It was more mature. The shading was careful. It showed a young girl standing at the edge of a forest. Behind her, in the distance, was a small house with smoke curling from the chimney. She was smiling. But her eyes were hollow. In the bottom right corner, someone had written, "I was found, but I'm still here." Sarah stared at it for a long time. This wasn't drawn from memory. This was drawn by someone still alive. That afternoon, Sarah and Olivia drove to a location mentioned in an old report, a burned-out mobile home lot in South Cedar Hollow. A call had come in back in 2018, children's voices howling in the woods, but it had been dismissed as a Halloween prank. They didn't dismiss it now. The land was overgrown, abandoned, dead. Shadow leapt from the back seat and immediately stiffened, nose high, tail tense. They followed him to a rusted garden shed hidden behind a collapsed fence. Its door hung open, swaying. Inside, silence, dust, garden tools, a moldy wheelbarrow. But beneath a pile of newspapers, Sarah found a crate. Inside, a half-used bottle of children's vitamins, a flashlight, a handmade plush fox, and a cassette recorder. She clicked it on. A familiar voice crackled to life. We don't run. We stay quiet. We follow the rules. The dog will come. He always does. Shadow growled low from the doorway. Sarah stood frozen. He's not just leaving trails, she whispered. He's conditioning them. That night, Sarah sat on her porch, Shadow pressed to her side. She couldn't shake the feeling. All of this, every clue, every whisper, wasn't leading to an end. It was leading deeper. And Vincent Hale wasn't just choosing the kids, he was choosing them. Her. Shadow. 3 days later, a tip came in. A local utility worker had found a child wandering near an old train trestle, silent, barefoot, holding a plush fox with one eye missing. Her name was Grace Walker. Alive. 7 years after she disappeared. At the hospital, Sarah stood outside the observation room, watching through the glass. Grace sat on the edge of the bed, legs dangling, a nurse gently brushing mud from her feet. She didn't cry, didn't ask for food. She just held onto the fox like it was stitched into her hands. When Sarah stepped inside, Grace looked up. Her voice was barely a whisper. He said the dog would come. Shadow walked forward, slow and careful, and rested his head on her lap. She didn't flinch, she just leaned down and hugged him. I knew it, she said. Afterward, Olivia approached with a folder. This doesn't make sense, she muttered. Grace was found less than 20 miles from the Carter boys. That's a tight circle, Sarah nodded. He's not operating across states anymore. He's circling. No, Sarah said quietly. He's closing in. Back at the station, the mailroom delivered an unmarked envelope to Sarah's desk. Inside, a Polaroid, grainy, slightly overexposed. It showed Sarah and Shadow walking a trail behind the station. The timestamp. 2 nights ago. On the back of the photo, written in that same uneven handwriting, you've always been the one. The only one who saw it. The only one I couldn't break. But I never wanted to break you. I wanted you to finish the story. No name. No address, just a chilling finality. Sarah set the photo down. Looked at Shadow. He didn't wag. He just stared at the door. Waiting. It came in the morning mail. A single water-stained postcard, folded once and held closed by a rusted safety pin. On the front, a faded photograph of a rundown amusement park. The name printed across the top, barely legible under decades of grime. Valley Pines Family Fun Center. Sarah Bennett held the postcard between 2 gloved fingers, heart suddenly heavy with memory. She knew that place. Everyone from Tenney County did. Before it shut down in 2017, Valley Pines was the summer destination for families who couldn't afford much. Discount tickets for foster families, church groups, daycares. A carousel with chipped horses, tilt-a-whirl rides that made your teeth rattle, and the best cotton candy this side of the Ozarks. It had been a haven for forgotten kids, and now it was haunted again. Sarah turned the card over. On the back, written in the same uneven, blocky handwriting, "You're not done. I'm still waiting. Bring the dog." Below it, a set of GPS coordinates. No signature, no return address, just an invitation. Or a challenge. Agent Olivia Brooks didn't like it. "This is a trap," she said, slamming the evidence bag onto the table. "He's baiting you, personally." "I know. Then why even consider going in alone?" Sarah looked over at Shadow, curled beneath the window, his eyes fixed on the shadows outside. "Because he isn't running," she said. "He's waiting. And you think you'll get to him?" "No," Sarah said. "I think he wants me to." By dawn the next day, Sarah was in her SUV, Shadow in the passenger seat, the GPS blinking steadily toward the woods beyond Taneyville, about 5 miles from the old amusement park. No patrols. No cell towers, no nearby structures, only forgotten logging trails and one thin footpath cut through overgrown brush. The deeper she drove, the quieter the world became, until even the birds seemed to vanish. They parked at the edge of an old ranger access road. Sarah opened her door. The air smelled of pine and rot. "Let's finish this," she whispered. Shadow hopped down, alert, every sense on edge. They followed the coordinates on foot for nearly an hour, weaving through trees and fallen logs until the signal stopped. Nothing around, just rocks, ferns, the quiet breath of the forest. And then Shadow froze. His ears snapped forward. He barked, sharp and clear, and ran toward a brush-covered hillside. Sarah followed. Hidden under a torn blue tarp, they found a metal hatch, bolted into the earth like a bomb shelter. Rust stained the corners. A simple padlock dangled from the latch. Sarah pulled a pry bar from her pack and popped it open with a grunt. The door creaked. Darkness yawned below. She clicked on her flashlight. A narrow staircase descended into silence. She looked down at Shadow. "With me?" He didn't hesitate. The air inside was stale and cold, thick with dust and damp earth. The walls were concrete. Smooth, poured deliberately. This wasn't some haphazard bunker, it had been built with purpose. At the bottom was a single room, no larger than a jail cell. Inside, a cot with a thin folded blanket, canned food stacked neatly in crates, coloring pages and children's books scattered across the floor, and in the corner, a cassette recorder, already running. Sarah stepped forward and pressed play. Vincent Hale's voice spilled out, calm as ever. "When the world forgets, someone always remembers. That's what dogs are for. To remember the ones no one else can find." Then silence. Sarah turned slowly. On the far wall, written in chalk, was a sentence. "She's still waiting." Sarah exhaled, shaking. "This isn't a shelter," she whispered. "It's a monument." Shadow pawed the ground near the back corner, whining. Someone had been here recently. They just weren't anymore. Back at the station, Sarah couldn't sit still. Her mind raced, tracing every breadcrumb Vincent had dropped. He had led them here, not to catch him, but to understand him, to follow the story. Every note, every voice recording, every drawing. And now this a bunker beneath the woods. Olivia returned that evening with more intel. "We ran the voice from the new tape against archived public records," she said. "Got a partial match," Sarah turned. "From where?" "A local radio interview, 2015, community cleanup campaign." Speaker Vincent Hale, public access. Sarah didn't even need to hear it. She knew. The voice was the same, calm, even, manipulative, without ever raising its volume. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. Shadow paced again, restless. At 3:17 a.m., Shadow growled and walked to the back door. Sarah grabbed her flashlight. Outside, the world looked the same. But something had changed. Pinned to her mailbox was another note. This one scrawled hastily, as if with a shaking hand. "You always were the good one. But don't forget she still is." Underneath a word. Grace. Sarah stared into the dark tree line. Whoever Vincent Hale was, he hadn't disappeared. He was still watching. Still close. And worse, he was still writing. 3 days had passed since the bunker. 3 days since the postcard. Since the chalk message. Since Grace Walker whispered, "He said the dog would come." Deputy Sarah Bennett hadn't slept much since. Neither had Shadow. The shepherd was on edge more so than usual. Even in the station, where things were usually calm, he wouldn't rest. He paced by the door, watched every passing shadow, refused to eat unless Sarah was close. He was sensing something, and Sarah had learned to trust him. Her office wall was now covered floor to ceiling with pinned notes, maps, and photos. Not just of missing children, but of their searchers, the volunteers, the detectives, the canine handlers. For years, she'd been looking at the wrong pattern. It wasn't just about the children. It was about the people who came after them, and that changed everything. Agent Olivia Brooks walked in, holding a manila envelope. "We've been compiling everything Hale ever touched," she said, tossing it onto the desk. "It's worse than we thought." Sarah opened it. Inside, reports. Therapy transcripts, journals, and drawings. Dozens of them. Not from victims, but from rescuers, kids drawing officers, dogs, search teams, flashlights, badges. Every one of them depicted not just what happened, but how they were found, or who found them. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she flipped through the images. In several, there were stick figures labeled her and him next to a black dog labeled Shadow. He hadn't just been watching. He'd been teaching them to remember, to expect Shadow, to believe in him. "He's built mythology," Olivia muttered, staring at the wall. "Not just for himself, but for the kids." "And for us," Sarah whispered. They had recovered 5 confirmed connections to Hale's pattern. Ethan, Daniel Carter, 2023. Grace Walker, 2019. Lacey Jordan, 2016. M. Serrano, 2016, previously considered a runaway J. Cartwright, 2019, case reopened with Hale's DNA on blanket fibers. Each child had disappeared under different circumstances, different locations, different states. But the same element repeated. They were found only after a prolonged search effort involving canine units, especially dogs with strong public records. Sarah stared at the names and dates. "He doesn't just abduct," she murmured. "He curates." Olivia nodded slowly. "He's selecting cases with high emotional resonance, families that won't stop searching, officers who form bonds, children who are vulnerable but not broken. And then what? Then he waits," Olivia said, "until the moment the right rescuer is ready to find them." It made horrifying sense. Vincent Hale didn't want to hurt the children, not physically. He wanted to observe, test, as if they were part of some sick social experiment, some long-form novel in which he wrote both victim and savior into the script. That evening, Sarah received an encrypted message from the FBI linguistics lab. The voice print on the bunker recording was a 90% match to an archived file from 2012 of an audio evaluation conducted during a court-mandated session for Hale following a custody dispute. He'd lost the case. The mother moved out of state with their daughter. The name of the child, Grace Walker. Sarah's jaw clenched. Grace wasn't just a random name on his list. She was his daughter, and when the system took her away, he didn't try to win her back. He built a world where someone else would. Later that night, Sarah returned home and found another envelope waiting at her front porch. Inside, a single photograph. This time it wasn't grainy, it was clear. Shot from across the road, through brush. It showed Sarah walking Shadow by the river trail just days ago, and on the back, one line. "You always knew the story wasn't about endings. It's about who still listens." No name, no signature. Just truth. That same night, Sarah couldn't sit still. She walked Shadow along the back trail behind the station. It was nearly midnight. No cars, no wind. Just trees swaying gently, like they knew secrets no one had the heart to speak aloud. Shadow stopped suddenly, ears high. Then he growled. Low. Sarah swept her flashlight across the trees. Nothing. But then she saw it scratched into the dirt beside the path. RK9. And below it, another symbol. A spiral. Hand-drawn. Fresh. The same spiral that had appeared on the blanket in Grace's bunker. The same spiral etched in chalk above the words, "She's still waiting." He wasn't just following them anymore. He was leaving them clues. scripted ones. Back at the station, Sarah pinned the spiral next to the last photo. She stepped back and looked at the board, now no longer a wall of scattered cases, but a narrative, a sick, methodical narrative. And she realized something else. Hale never interfered during rescues, never tried to stop them, never retaliated, because being found was part of the plan. He needed it, he wanted it, but only after the story played out exactly the way he wrote it. Shadow barked once from the door. Sarah turned. His tail was stiff, his ears alert. But this bark wasn't panic, it was warning. She stepped outside, scanned the lot, nothing. Then, something rustled. A low branch snapped. And across the road, half shielded by the trees, stood a figure. Motionless. Watching. Sarah raised her flashlight, but by the time the beam hit the woods, he was gone. The sky was just beginning to brighten when Sarah Bennett pulled her SUV to a stop outside a rusted chain-link fence. The sign above the archway had long since faded, but she didn't need it to know where she was. Valley Pines, Family Fun Center, the last breadcrumb. The final setting in a twisted story written by a man who didn't just steal children, he staged memories. Beside her, Shadow stood alert in the passenger seat, nose twitching as he watched the tree line beyond the crumbling parking lot. He was ready. So was she. Sarah radioed in her position to Agent Olivia Brooks, who confirmed the FBI team was staged 5 miles out, per Sarah's request. "I go in first," Sarah had insisted. "This started with us." "It ends with us." Olivia didn't argue. She understood what this had become, not a manhunt. A confrontation. A reckoning. The gate groaned open under Sarah's hand. Vines snaked around rusted turnstiles. A collapsed awning lay across what had once been a bumper car arena. The wind whispered through warped wooden roller coaster beams, like voices from another time. It was a ghost town built for laughter, now quiet as a grave. But Sarah felt something wasn't dead here. Something was waiting. Shadow pulled forward, his paws sure, body tense. They passed shattered candy stands, broken arcade windows, a photo booth covered in moss. Then Shadow froze. He turned sharply, ears pricked toward a small wooden shack near the back fence, the lost and found. Its door was cracked open. Sarah unholstered her weapon and approached slowly. The air shifted musty, tinged with rot and old sugar. Inside, her flashlight swept across discarded coats, boxes of plush animals, a rack of faded jackets. Then it landed on something bright. A child's backpack, pink, covered in tiny glittering stars. A name tag dangled from the zipper. Jenny. Sarah's breath caught. She stepped deeper, and the curled in a corner of the shack, wrapped in a threadbare sleeping bag, was a young girl. Pale. Thin, alive. She clutched a plush fox, one eye missing, its fur matted with dirt. When Sarah's light touched her face, she didn't flinch. She just blinked up at her. Calm. Still. "Hi," the girl said softly. Sarah lowered her weapon instantly. "Hey, sweetie. My name is Sarah. You're safe now." The girl's eyes flicked to Shadow, who stepped forward slowly and lay beside her. She buried her fingers into his fur like she'd known him forever. "He said the dog would come," she whispered. "What's your name?" Sarah asked, though she already knew. "Jenny," the girl said. Jenny Cartwright. Jenny had been missing for 4 years. Her case had gone cold. But now, here she was alive, breathing, holding onto a fox, sewn by hands, long forgotten. And waiting for a promise. The dog will come. And he had. FBI teams arrived minutes later. Paramedics wrapped Jenny in blankets and gave her warm fluids. She didn't cry. She didn't run. She just watched everything happen with quiet acceptance, like she'd already seen it play out in her mind, like someone had rehearsed it with her. Later, Sarah stood with Olivia at the perimeter of the park. "We found tire tracks near the maintenance road," Olivia said grimly.
fresh, steel-toed boot prints too. Size 12. We missed him by hours. Sarah didn't respond. She didn't have to. They both knew. Vincent Hale had been there, watching, waiting. And then, gone. That night, Sarah sat in the quiet of her office. Jenny was safe. Alive. The world would call that a victory, but it didn't feel like one. Not completely. She looked at the wall photos of rescued children, recovered items, symbols, dates, a map not of abductions, but of messages. Each child had been left to be found, each rescue was allowed, because Hale didn't want to destroy them. He wanted to shape the ending. Sarah reached into her drawer and pulled out a sketch found in the bunker 2 weeks earlier. A crayon drawing of a camper. 3 children inside, a dog outside, and a man drawn in red, always just out of reach. Underneath, in small scribbled letters, I knew he'd come, but I think he's still watching. Sarah stared at it for a long time. So did Shadow. Then someone knocked on the door. A courier. Envelope. No return address. Sarah opened it with gloved hands. Inside, a single Polaroid, this one different. It showed Jenny, from behind, sitting at the edge of the lost and found shack, watching Shadow. Taken from a distance. Before Sarah arrived, and written on the back, she waited, you showed up. That's what matters. No signature, just an old spiral symbol drawn underneath, faint, but unmistakable. Vincent Hale had been there. He'd seen everything. And now he was giving credit. The game wasn't over, but that move was his nod. That night, Sarah didn't speak much. She sat with Shadow on the porch as the wind moved through the trees like a whisper. Jenny had told the therapist something strange during transport. He didn't hurt me. He just told me stories. Said when it was time, the right one would come. The good one. The one with the dog. Sarah rested her hand on Shadow's back. He nudged her elbow gently, eyes steady. She whispered, "We're not done." "Are we, boy?" Shadow didn't move. He just kept watching the trees, waiting. Listening, like he always had. 3 weeks had passed since Jenny Cartwright was found. She was safe now physically, but emotionally, her words still echoed inside Sarah Bennett's mind. He didn't hurt me. He just told me stories. Said you were the one who would come. The media had moved on. The headlines faded, but Sarah hadn't. Neither had Shadow. He still sat by the front door most nights, watching, waiting, like he knew something was unfinished. And Sarah agreed. Because Vincent Hale hadn't just vanished. He'd retreated, like an author closing the final chapter, but waiting to see if anyone was still reading. In her office, the board had evolved. The chaos had become structure. Lines connected not just victims but responders. Dog handlers, caseworkers, foster parents. Each child taken had someone specific in their orbit, someone dedicated, persistent, emotionally invested. Vincent hadn't just collected children. He'd chosen them based on who would come looking. Agent Olivia Brooks joined her late that night, holding a coffee in one hand, a stack of old paper files in the other. "We found something buried in a sealed custody case," she said. Vincent Hale petitioned the court in 2011 to gain custody of a girl, Grace Walker. Sarah nodded. He lost. That's when he disappeared. Disappeared from the system, maybe, Olivia said, but not from the story. She dropped a folder on the desk. Inside was a faded child's drawing, not one they'd recovered from the woods, one from the court file. It showed a girl and a dog. Beside them, written in big, clumsy letters, "If I get lost, the dog will find me." Sarah swallowed. He gave this to her during visitation? We think so. He recorded tapes, too. Gave her picture books. Repetition phrases, like training. Like a script. Olivia nodded. He wasn't just preparing the kids for survival. He was preparing them for discovery. Back at home, Sarah sat on the porch beside Shadow, flipping through every drawing and note they'd recovered. She found the spiral again, over and over, sometimes hidden in the corner, sometimes drawn openly, always paired with the same 3 words, still out there. That night, something finally shifted. It wasn't an envelope this time. It was a map folded, taped to her car windshield, no note, no handwriting. But one place was circled in red, Echo Ridge Mine, abandoned since the 1980s, no paved access roads, no cell signal, just rock, wind, and dust. Sarah brought it to Olivia the next morning. "He's choosing to end this where no one's listening," she said. "Or where no one can interrupt," Olivia replied. They planned carefully. 2 backup teams would remain on standby outside the perimeter. No sirens, no lights, no pressure. Sarah would go in first, with Shadow. Just like always. The drive out to Echo Ridge was silent. The roads narrowed from gravel to dirt to overgrown trail. Birds disappeared. Wind fell still. Shadow stood in the back of the SUV, tail stiff, body alert. They were getting close. Sarah parked just before the trailhead and stepped out. Shadow followed. The mine entrance was easy to miss, half collapsed, surrounded by brush and shale, but Vincent Hale had marked it, spray-painted faintly near the door. "You came." Sarah flicked on her flashlight. The air inside was damp and stale, long forgotten. The mine shaft sloped downward, lined with rotted timber. Every step echoed like a memory. Shadow led, nose twitching, head low. About 200 feet in, they found it. A room carved into the rock-ons, used for tool storage, now repurposed. Inside, a small camping chair, a box of children's drawings, some new, and a recorder, already running. Sarah pressed play. Vincent's voice, calm as ever. This wasn't about hurting them. It was about seeing who would come, who still believed someone was worth finding. A pause. "And you did, every time. Especially you." Sarah stepped forward. On the far wall, lit by her flashlight beam, was a single phrase in red marker. "It was always your story." I just wrote the first line. Underneath it, a photo of her, age 12, smiling, in foster care, kneeling beside a German shepherd, her first partner dog. It was Shadow. Before his service years, before the badge, before it all. Sarah staggered back. "No!" Shadow stepped forward, sniffed the photo, then looked back at her. He remembered. So did she. Vincent Hale had known them long before the first child disappeared, before Grace, before Jenny. He'd chosen them not as rescuers, but as participants. She turned sharply as a light flickered. At the far end of the room, a tunnel continued downward. Fresh footprints. Large, steel-toed, they vanished into the dark. Sarah didn't follow. Not yet. She radioed Olivia. "He was here. He's deeper inside. Do you want backup?" Sarah looked at Shadow, then back into the dark. "No," she said softly. "He doesn't run. He waits." The tunnel narrowed. Air thickened. Silence deepened. Every footstep echoed like a heartbeat as Sarah Bennett and Shadow moved deeper into the mining own final time. They had followed Vincent Hale's story from the woods to the farmhouse, from the bunker to the amusement park, from whispers in the trees to drawings in the dark. Now there was nowhere left to go except forward, no backup. No lights, no second chances, just the 2 of them. As it had always been. At the end of the passage, the rock opened into a crude chamber, lit by a single camping lantern. Empty, except for a small wooden table, a worn journal, and an old cassette recorder. Sarah stepped forward, Shadow at her side. She reached for the journal first. Inside were pages of neat, slanted handwriting. Not confessions, not apologies, just stories. Each entry described a child, where they were found, who found them, how they smiled, how they trusted. Some were familiar names: Grace, Jenny, Lacey, Daniel, Ethan. Others were unknown, maybe still waiting, or never found. At the bottom of the last page, 4 words were written in bold. You kept showing up. She pressed play on the cassette. Vincent's voice filled the silence, low, steady, soft. I wasn't born a monster, no. I was born forgotten. The world left me behind when I was a boy. The system, the courts, the parents who never came back. But I remembered the ones who tried, the ones who didn't stop. I built this for them, for you. A long pause. If you're hearing this, the story is yours now, not mine. Finish it how you want. The tape clicked. Then silence. Sarah stood frozen, not from fear, but from something colder. Recognition. Vincent hadn't just watched her career. He'd followed her life. Knew her past, her foster homes, her first K-9, her losses, her victories. And somehow, in his fractured mind, he'd decided she was the one worthy of carrying the weight of every child he had displaced and every rescue he had orchestrated. He hadn't been trying to escape. He had been writing his ending and handing her the pen. Shadow nuzzled her hand. They stood there for a long time, surrounded by rock, memory, and one final truth. This wasn't about one man. It never had been. It was about who still listens when no one else does. Outside, the wind had picked up. Olivia Brooks met her at the mine entrance. Was he there? Sarah shook her head. Not anymore. Any sign he'll come back? Sarah looked down at Shadow, then toward the mountains beyond. He already has what he wanted, but he gave us something too. He gave us the truth. 3 months later, Jenny Cartwright was reunited with her mother. A quiet ceremony at the community center. No press, no cameras, just a girl, a fox plushie, and a family healing. When she saw Sarah and Shadow enter the back of the room, she ran straight to them. He remembered, she whispered into Shadow's fur, just like he said he would. Sarah doesn't tell her everything. She doesn't have to. Some stories don't need to be retold, they just need to be heard. That night, Sarah sat on her porch. Shadow curled at her feet, breathing slow and steady. She held the last page of Hale's journal in her lap. It didn't scare her anymore. It humbled her. Because in the end, this story wasn't about monsters. It was about the ones who kept looking. And the ones who were worth being found. There are heroes who wear badges, and some who just happen to bark. Life isn't about who shouts the loudest, it's about who shows up and listens when it matters most. The story of Sarah Bennett and her loyal dog Shadow isn't just a tale of mystery or heroism. It's a reminder that some of life's greatest battles are fought in silence, in the quiet determination to keep looking when others give up, to keep listening when others turn away. The villain, twisted as he became, was once a forgotten child. The difference between being lost and being found often lies in one thing: someone who refuses to stop searching. For older generations, this story stirs a deeper truth. Many of us carry memories of being overlooked, dismissed, or unheard. But we also remember the ones who stayed, the friend who checked in, the grandparent who waited, the teacher who noticed. In a noisy world obsessed with attention, this story whispers something more powerful. Kindness leaves footprints. Loyalty saves lives, and listening, truly listening, can rescue a soul. Let us be the ones who keep showing up. Even when it's hard, especially when no one else does.